Okay, thank you all for joining us for our October CE event in our monthly Child and Adolescent Professional Development Series. I'm Donna Bartlett. I am a member of the outreach team here at SunCloud Health. SunCloud Health provides integrated, nuanced treatment with residential PHP and IOP, and also virtual services for adults and adolescents ages 12 to 18, focusing on treating the whole person in Naperville, Northbrook, and Lincoln Park. And exciting news, we're opening our adolescent residential in Matson, Illinois in just a few weeks here. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. But I'm really excited about that. Okay, if you're interested in learning anything more, obviously my information and Lori Kehoe, who is also my counterpart in adolescence, here will be included at the last slide for your reference. To make a referral, you can contact one of us directly and or call our intake number, which will also be listed. I'll also be following up with you after this. Okay, please note to receive your CE credit today, you will need to remain on the Zoom for the entirety of the presentation. Also, you will receive an email including the quiz and survey. Please complete these to receive your CE certificate by email. You should expect to receive it within 7 to 10 days. Also, if you would just throw in the chat kind of where you're from and what your role is. And if you have any questions, obviously, feel free to use the chat. But also at the end of the webinar, we are going to have time for questions, but Caressa will probably answer throughout too, if possible. Okay, so let's talk about Caressa. She's an educator who is deeply passionate about systems, data, equity, and collaboration. And at her very core, she believes in the power of people. She earned her degree in school psychology from Loyola University and her master's in educational leadership from North Central College. Caressa began her career as a school psychologist, serving 2 years at Monroe Middle School in District 200 and 4 years in that role at Naperville Central High School. She is now in her 4th year as the Dean of Interventions at Naperville Central, where she continues to champion inclusive, data-driven systems that support every student's services. Okay, take it away. I will stop sharing.
Okay. Well, hello, everyone. I look forward to talking to you. I see a lot of school staff members, and so some of the language I'm going to be using today is going to be very familiar to you. But if there's something that I can clarify or help to make clearer on what I'm talking about, because us in the school world, we know that we use a lot of acronyms. I'm happy to do that just to help support your learning experience today. And so, Donna, thank you so much for that lovely and warm welcome. I will move on. So as you know, learning outcomes for today are identify and explain what MTSS, or multi-tiered systems of support, mean from a school perspective, learn about levels of support available at a suburban high school. So I work at Naperville Central High School, so our building, to support student mental health and how they align to MTSS process and procedure within the school system associated with students who access a higher level of care and understand how homeschool and community partnership impact student progress towards short and long-term goals. So my role is a unique one. I am trained as a psychologist and I'm also an administrator. I directly support our MTSS practices across our building and specifically in direct collaboration with 4 student services teams. I oversee our ALOP, or Alternative Learning Opportunities programs, which includes credit recovery options through Ombudsman. We have an on-site and an off-site option. We also partner with an alternative day school that services not only students with IEPs, but students without IEPs who may need more intensified support due to learning behavior or SEL needs that exceed what we can offer here at Naperville Central, as well as a Tier 3 intervention that we developed here at Naperville Central that targets students learning around there is every reason you should be able to do well in school, but for some reason you don't. And so it's executive function behavior, SEL, but from an academic standpoint, you should be able to be making progress, but you're not. So that's why we have enriched studies. I supervise all of our psychologists, our social workers, and nurses. We are resource rich here at Naperville Central. We have 4 psychologists, 6 social workers, one with a very unique title who works with me under ALOP. Her title is Student Success Interventionist. And then we have 2 full-time certified nurses. I also co-evaluate each of those professionals with a discipline-specific supervisor, and I co-evaluate our nurse techs and assistants, as well as our counselors within our student services department. So I'm very immersed in student services. I manage and run our Signs of Suicide program. Hi, Valerie. I saw you were here today. And so I help to support that, or really lead that. I act as a hospital liaison. So that is helping communicate between home and school and helping manage and set up a plan for students who leave school for medical reasons and then return. And then I have a multitude other roles, tasks, and responsibilities that have just come naturally to me because of my specific areas of expertise and personal interests. So with all that being said, I will get into how I drive my work on a day-to-day basis with teams, with students, and they really boil down to these questions. We know at the core of all of our practices is what's best for kids. And so when I am working with teams, with students, with families, these are the questions that really drive my practice. What is the problem we're trying to solve? What do we know about this student? Specifically personality, interests, values, family and support network, personal goals, academics, behavior, school history, all of these things. What is important? How are we going to help that student get to what's important to them? Because I always tell my high schoolers, high school is about this much of your life. And our job is to help catapult you to those next steps and make sure you have what you need to get there. What has been done to support this student and what documentation exists? You're going to hear me talk about data and documentation a lot today. I like to joke that sometimes it's a swear word for some people, but it is something that really drives our practice here at Naperville Central. What don't we know? Oftentimes we're faced with really difficult problems. And so in establishing a plan to address those problems, we need to know what we don't know to be able then to create a path towards knowledge. What resources can we leverage? And lastly, what should our next steps be? And so this drives our MTSS practice and my practice, to be frank. So I'm going to start out big scale and I'm going to kind of narrow it as we move through tiers of support and talking about what MTSS is. So factors that drive success for building MTSS process. Relationships. I can't emphasize this enough in my career. What has made and broken every successful implementation of multi-tiered systems of supports are relationships. You're going to hear me often speak about systems, communication, support, knowing how all of those pieces are interconnected and how you connect them and creating transparency within those. I value so much the expertise and the collective expertise that is available to us in a public school setting. And so we work really hard at Naperville Central and as well as the teams that I get to collaborate with within the building and outside of to make sure that we're leveraging that knowledge and then applying that in a way that helps to support students towards their short and long-term goals. To support all of this, we need administration buy-in. From the perspective of Naperville Central, yes, I am an administrator, but I did not start out as an administrator in this building. And so a lot of time, work, and effort went into establishing those relationships and building up buy-in around what is our shared why, where do we all want to go together, and how can we use our specific job-related responsibilities to all work towards that common goal, which is supporting our students. Knowledge of and allocation of resources is also where having administration buy-in is significantly important. As a staff member in a building, you often don't have the ability to say, we're going to use this resource in this way, or we are going to allocate these funds towards X, Y, and Z. And so having your administrators as part of your thinking process within the MTSS system is essential because then you can help build processes and supports and systems that are not only supportive of students, but supportive of the staff members who have to implement those services. And then I already referenced this, data is at the core of our practice. What information exists? Can the relevant stakeholders access that information and can they understand it? These are things that are essential to make sure that you can implement a successful MTSS process in a way that is effective not only for you as a professional, but for your system. Excuse me. And then when you have that information, your stakeholders can access it. What story does your data tell you? What are you able to identify as what is working? What is going really well? Where are you a rock star and where can you celebrate that? But then what isn't working? What gaps exist? What knowledge needs to be added to your learning environment to enhance not only yourself professionally, but those professionals around you to then be able to work towards that common goal. So again, from a top-down perspective, we want to get the people who can make the decisions and be the decision makers to buy into what we're selling, which is what is best for kids. And so all of that, tier one has to be a priority. And so at Naperville Central, we've done a lot of work around what does tier one mean? What does best practice service delivery look like at a tier one level? And how can we enhance the knowledge of those stakeholders so that they can best support students within the environment that they are working with them? In addition to supporting those students, how do they know how to access additional supports and resources, and do they know what those are? And so a lot of work from our building and advice I'm going to share with you today was around just the communication and transparency piece. And then that leads into my last bullet point, which is articulating the process that informs MTSS. If there's somebody who doesn't understand it, that's a weak link in your cog. You want to be able to set everyone up to work together collaboratively in a manner that is effective not only for them as a professional, because everybody comes to work wanting to do a good job, but then sets up that professional to be able to appropriately support students. So to dive in deeper, I am somebody who goes to presentations and always wants resources. I have linked a mini skills presentation from the National Association of School Psychologists, a mini skills presentation that was shared. I'm not going to dive into that, but this is for your consumption. Major takeaways and points that I would say are beneficial for you to be aware of is that the mini skills presentation is a great summary of tiered support, a bank of resources targeting student success. So for instance, presenters cite a specific process aligned to responding to student needs from a tiered perspective and reinforce the value of the process at starting at tier one through tier three as appropriate and as informed by data. There are a ton of handouts and resources linked within this presentation itself. And so a resource for you. But what it reinforces that is a successful MTSS system is really established by making sure that all your stakeholders are able to access that information, that you know how to move through the tiers and what information is needed to move from tier one, two, and three, et cetera. Within tier one, and from a building level perspective, though, to inform our practices, we need preventative measures or early identification systems. At Naperville Central, we have used needs assessment surveys. We have the Panorama survey that is a survey that is established through a company that we partner with that is rolled out to not only students, staff, but parents as well. And so we can then collect information to get a baseline understanding of specific areas of functioning and school life that can then target how we are going to respond to and support our students and our learning community. We also, and I'll talk about it a little bit more, but have preventative programs such as our Signs of Suicide program that is implemented here at the building. And so that is another way in which we are trying to look at what needs exist and how can we respond to those needs. Community and family engagement are also so core to our MTSS process. This last school or over this summer, our building leadership chose to invite parents and students into our school improvement planning process. I thought this was a fabulous example of helping to craft buy-in and help establish more consensus around what we're doing as a school community to best support our kids. Because at the end of the day, we want to create students who are ready to go into the next step of their life and do that amazing, awesome thing. And so that amazing, awesome thing could be college, it could be a trade school, it could be going into work, it could be military. We want to have so many different perspectives and life choices that we need to support. And so building up community buy-in and consensus is super important, as well as just making sure that stakeholders are aware of additional community resources such as SunCloud. Um, Teacher and staff consultation and teaming, again, another resource for you. It is so essential that we are using our collective expertise to support each other. I always tell my teacher teams and my academic department chairs, academics is not my expertise. I rely on you. And so collaboration and that consultation and discussions are where we can be the most successful in targeting what students need and how we are going to help get them from A to B. And so that consultation and collaboration is essential. And so then going back to those clearly articulated tiers, having the interventions laid out, having clearly defined reasons as to why we would recommend an increased support, such as tier 2 or tier 3, will then help drive a successful MTSS system. And the last piece, again, is that data should be informing our practice, and where that data can be looked at, especially from a tier 1 perspective, is in professional learning communities such as PLCs. And so within a school system like ours, we meet weekly as PLCs to look at student data to inform our response to their needs. From a tier 1 perspective, we're looking at data to inform what we're doing in the classroom. We're also looking at the students who are not accessing information. How can we then increase support when it appropriately is identified as a need? I'm going to pause there. Any questions? I want to keep moving because I know we have about 30 minutes left in our presentation.
I know one of the questions, Caressa, was just how many students you have based on, obviously, I think in the opening slide, you talked about how many social workers. And so one of the questions I saw was how many students you have at Naperville Central.
Um, in the past, I'm going to say approximate range between 2,500 and 2,700 students. One point that I'm very proud of in this district is that our psychologists and social workers really collaborate across many domains of student functioning. And so and I'll talk about the interventions that we provide, but we have really maintained a student to service provider ratio that allows us to be very responsive to a multitude of needs within the building. All right, so I'm going to continue on. So at NCHS, how we have really successfully started to establish and reinforce our MTSS process are through a few different layers. At its antithesis at the beginning, it was myself and 3 other psychologists, our dean of intervention, who is now our assistant principal of student services, and our assistant principal of curriculum and instruction. We all came together and formed the intervention team. The intervention team evolved over time to include additional stakeholders, but at its core, the goal was, what do we know about our building? What services and supports are available to kids? How do we articulate that information to create that clarity? And what information gaps exist? And so establishing that team was an essential and fundamental part to developing our MTSS system. And that is something I cannot emphasize more as a way to, from your own perspective in your buildings, think about, what do I know? What don't I know? And then how can we close those gaps? And how can we create transparency in the information I know amongst other professionals? And so intervention team was a fabulous opportunity for us to not only collaborate amongst each other who were passionate about making sure we could provide services, but then also establish leadership buy-in. And so it was a really good joint venture to help support our students in our building. And so I'm going to jump to, we have 2 different hyperlinks here, and I'm going to briefly talk through those, but part of that work helped us then to create that transparency for staff. So this academic supports visual, I'm clicking on that. Donna, can you see the
Yes.
pyramid? Okay, great. This is something that we built through as an intervention team that is a visual of just summarizing our supports for all staff. There's another visual I'm going to show you that is shared explicitly with student services right now, but this is a way for us to tell teachers and other support professionals in the building, this is how we move through the tiers. We start with our high quality daily instruction that is delivered through teacher and PLC teams. Our source support is something specific to our district, which is a resource that's available to all students, but it only happens a couple times a week or within the month. And so that is an additional time and intervention to work with students, to build connections, to make sure they're accessing information around behavior expectations, school events, making sure that we're building connection with a teacher. So that's why we called it tier 1.5. It's a special tier that we developed. At our building, we also, our tier 2 supports are specific to making sure that over a short time period, we are addressing a skill deficit or need. And so we've just defined what those look like. And with all of these supports, with the exception of supported study hall, are truly meant to be a short term. Our supported study hall, while meant to be short term, is a scheduled, or it's a class placed in the student schedule. And so the goal of our supported study hall, and we have data to help to target students' progress within that intervention, can then lead us to say, are they making progress? Can we move them to a study hall where they need less support, or do they need more support? And let's move them to a tier 3, which is then that more intensified, individualized intervention to target student skills. And so that is this visual that we created for our staff. Another visual is the one that we created for our student services teams. And so this is something that is shared with all of our teams and is meant or designed to help them think through, have we done enough at tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 to then inform our next steps. This is another way for us then to also monitor, have we missed steps? And it really helps to guide discussions and decision making, especially when we come to those more intense individual cases. And so resources, again, for you to consider. The student services teams are really our masters of MTSS here at Naperville Central. We work as a unit, and our teams are typically comprised of a dean, a social worker, a psychologist, a nurse, counselors, as well as other support professionals, such as we have our student advocates who are professional or who are specialists in restorative practices. We have our student success interventionist who partners with me from an SEL and EF lens under ALOP. And so a lot of people coming together to discuss specific student needs. Lastly is our problem solving meetings and documentation. We as a building over the past several years have really worked hard to establish a process around making sure we can document what we're doing. The beast of high school is that you have to get credits. Like, students have to graduate. We have them 4 years. And as much as we recognize skill specific instruction for skills is so very necessary, we always have to look at getting them on track to graduate. And one piece I did forget to mention is that our tier 3 interventions, such as math intervention, academic reading, and enriched studies, are all credit bearing courses. And so once you get to that tier 3 level, we're saying that you need a more intensified support to be able to make progress. But we also don't want to take away from your on trackness to graduating. And so we have developed curriculum to make sure that they have credit. And that has helped us significantly in our MTSS process, especially in addressing kids' specific needs. But as we all know, kids aren't meant to live in a tier 3 intervention. And so the goal is always to deliver this intensive intervention to get them back to the general education setting where they can continue to make progress and be with their general education peers. And so from a mental health perspective, this is a breakdown of our different services and supports that we provide from an MTSS perspective. We have our Signs of Suicide program, which is delivered to all Naperville Central students, with the exception of those who choose to opt out. But they all receive this intervention either in their advisory / homeroom or in health, which is our sophomores. The program itself is delivered at this time by psychologists, social workers, counselors, and some trained teachers. We also have a curriculum that has SEL targets identified within those strands, and that has been done through our curriculum work within the district perspective, I would say. And so students have the opportunity to be able to make sure that they're targeting SEL learning in their day to day. We also deliver the homeroom lessons that I mentioned, and that's that SOAR, that 1.5. And so we can deliver content around, we've talked about implicit bias, we have talked about supporting other students in response to school events, as well as just different ways to connect students to our school community. And then we also have our counseling curriculum, and that is our counselors who push out into classrooms to help support college and career readiness, as well as just support skills around long-term goals. From a tier 2 SEL perspective, we have our Community Resource Center, which is led by and supported by our student advocates. These two professionals, like I mentioned before, are specifically trained and have expertise in the area of restorative justice. They target students who have needs that exceed regular ed or tier 1, around making sure that they are managing behaviors, emotions, and decisions that could interfere with their learning or the learning of others. And so they get specific learning in response to disciplinary events or conflicts with students, and they get support ongoing to make sure that those incidents don't occur again. At Naperville Central, we offer a variety of social emotional groups. At my last count, I believe we have 12 different groups running, and that's across special ed and general ed. But we do offer general education groups that target social and emotional self-management, as well as grief and executive functioning. And then from that standpoint, those groups are delivered by psychologists and social workers, and they happen on a weekly basis. And then we also have our regularly scheduled specialized instruction groups that are students who have an IEP. Lastly, from a tier 2 perspective, we have short-term individual meetings where we will monitor student progress in response to a specific need over the course of at a max 6 weeks. And so that may start as a weekly or a bi-weekly, but over a course of time, we're addressing a specific need and then hopefully getting that student back out into the regular ed environment without the need for support. Those that few students or tier 3 is our more specific individualized supports and interventions. We have our individual student services interventions. So that is when those weekly check-ins turn into a regular need. We can't just do a short term and then get you back out. We have identified a skill deficit. We are meeting with you regularly and we are monitoring your progress. We have used home visits and parent guardian meetings as a tier 3 intervention, as a way to kind of identify a problem, to say, this isn't working. Let's collaborate and agree on next steps. And then let's monitor students' progress towards meeting those shared agreements. And so that has been a tier 3 system of support that has been very effective for us. And then lastly, my role is kind of tier 3.5 is ALAP, and that's specifically our Naperville Bridge partnership, which is our therapeutic day school, as well as our alternative learning through ombudsman for credit recovery, as well as enriched studies. And so what's unique about this is that my consultation collaboration across all teams allows me to hear about what's going on from a building perspective and help to support teams around making decisions to benefit those specific students. All right. I'm going to pause because the next piece I'm going to be jumping into is more specific to supporting students following extended absences. Any other questions or thoughts?
Right now, I don't have anything in the chat. Oh, wait, we do. How does the 504 evaluation and special ed evaluation process fit into this?
Fabulous. Wonderful question. So from a special education standpoint, as we all know, the goal is we want students to be within the general education environment. And so from a general ed perspective, we have tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. When we have identified that a student's needs exceed that of the general education environment, we are saying that we suspect a disability and then would require accommodation, or so 504, or specialized instruction to help them access the general education environment. And so, for instance, I'm going to pick on one of the interventions we developed here at Naperville Central in Rich Studies. That intervention, we have all agreed that it can not exceed 2 semesters, because if you are a student who needs that level of support longer than 1 school year or 2 semesters, then we suspect that there is a greater need, possibly a disability, that might require specialized instruction so that you can consistently access the general education setting. And so we use this process to inform whether or not we need to consider an evaluation. Do we suspect a disability that is so great that it is exceeding our general education resources, tier 1, 2, 3, that now a student has specialized need under IDEA?
Actually, Sarah raised her hand. Can I get you off mute? You can get off mute. Go ahead, Sarah. Maybe not. Maybe put it in the chat. Sorry, Sarah. But then I have one other one, Caressa. If a school does not have homeroom as a daily tier 1 intervention for lessons, do you have any recommendations for another tiered option? Also, do you have specific lessons that you complete through a curriculum?
So those homeroom lessons were built up through a homeroom PLC. So bringing together a group of stakeholders to help then take the data, kind of going back to what is our need, what is our why, and then how are we going to meet that need. And so those staff members come together and then identify what information is needed to support students, and that's how it's delivered. So I can't give a specific curriculum because it's based on what our school needs are. A lot of times, especially if there's not like a tier 1, that's again where I would highly recommend that a systems key stakeholders should come together and start to talk about what are we doing at a tier 1 level to address social emotional learning needs, and then where are there those gaps. And once you identify those gaps, you can then build a plan towards it. School-wide PBIS systems have so much empirical support in being able to address student needs. And so sometimes at a high school level, though, that's not always sustainable. We can't always do token-based systems. We can't always have specific passes or charts or things like that. And so sometimes you have to be able to consider what is working within your system. So that's, again, having the right stakeholders at the table and say, how can we leverage those resources to then service all students? A lot of that work does happen from a leadership lens in this building in collaboration with our student services department. And we will identify these are the areas where we're doing great. This is where our needs are. And so then that drives our actionable next steps.
Caressa, what Sarah was just going to say is, so essentially, is the tier 4 like an evaluation for 504 and special ed?
Yes, you could call it tier 4, but I would almost say that we've exhausted the tiers. And I've had this conversation with parents on a multitude of times, is that our goal in my belief and our belief is that all students deserve a rich learning experience, and that we want to put them in the general education setting because they deserve that. That's where the best learning opportunities are going to be with their peers. And so how can we minimize or address those barriers to then help get those back into that learning environment? And so sometimes that's where interventions are appropriate, such as a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. But when that student is showing us that they need it and they cannot function without it, that's when we're going to say, I do think we need to consider a greater level of support here in the school setting to be able to help you be successful, which is specialized instruction. An IEP affirms and allows access to individuals who are trained in methods and strategies and have a knowledge of supports and expertise around student learning and student behavior to then be able to say, well, here are the things we can deliver and teach you. And then, as many of us know, an IEP then says, you have specific areas of need. This is how we're going to support it. And we're going to write goals that address those needs. And then we're going to monitor your progress towards it. Because essentially, if you're not making progress towards those goals, that information should then inform our next steps. It's a never-ending loop of trying something, seeing if it works, having evidence to say it did or it did not, using that information to drive next steps. Because as we know, within the special education side of things, it can go from least restrictive to I'm in the gen ed environment. Maybe I get some support from an LBS with some accommodations to the most restrictive, which is a therapeutic day school or a residential placement.
One more, Caressa. Jen, okay, so Jen Cave just asked the SOS program. You guys do it to the whole building, right? The whole district does it. I mean,
All
six
students,
through, right? 6 through 12, you
yep,
guys do it?
grades 6 through 12 get the Signs of Suicide program every school year in our building and in our district. And so
You do it
we
to health
deliver that. Pardon?
health classes? Which class do you do it
Health
to?
is for our sophomores, but freshmen, juniors, and seniors receive it in their homerooms and is delivered by trained teachers, psychologists, social workers, counselors, nurses, deans. It's kind of an all-in attitude around we need to raise awareness about the signs and symptoms of depression and suicide, and how can you recognize those and have a plan of what you're going to do in response to support somebody and hopefully save somebody's life.
And then Jen, like who delivers it? She said psychs, social workers, counselors, and some trained teachers.
We're working towards an all-in approach here at Naperville Central. My long-term goal is that all staff will be trained and able to deliver the Signs of Suicide program. With the acknowledgement that there may be some teachers who are like, that's not my area of expertise. That's okay. Our expectation is you're delivering this. We have specialists and experts who can help to extend that conversation if needed. That is not their responsibility. And so making sure, again, we are clear in our communication around expectations and different stakeholders' role within that process.
Which, as a side note, Jen, this was the first place that I did SOS. Like when they integrated, how many years has it been for you guys? Is it 8 that you guys have been doing SOS?
Oh, goodness. Yeah, it's been about 8 years. Yeah.
And so, like when they originally did it, I was there from when I worked at Linden Oaks. So I was one of the ones helping at that time. And they have so many staff because they're doing 6 through 12 that you guys use each other, right?
Absolutely.
Last question, sorry.
Um,
Do you want me to go or you want to continue and then we'll go to the end?
No, I can actually I'll address Rebecca's question because it's a
Okay.
good one. But it's also complicated, as many of us know.
Yeah.
So the question from Rebecca was, how do you respond regarding MTSS implementation when a parent provides a private neuropsychological report and a letter from a therapist or a letter from a healthcare provider identifying diagnosis, they ask for 504? As we all know, the language or the legal language around 504 is pretty broad. And so if there's ever a request for a 504 and there is evidence to suggest that there's a disability that may be impacting them, you are duty bound to consider an evaluation. And so you have to consider said information. Does it mean you have to do an evaluation? No. But you have to use the information that you have within your system, and that's the whole child lens, not just academics, but academics, behavior, SEL, any known information. What can we use to consider? Is there a disability present that would afford the student the right to access accommodations to meaningfully access the learning environment? And so that one, it can sometimes be difficult because 504 is so broad in its interpretation. With special ed, it's a little bit more specific, and we can use a little bit more of that process to rule out to say, we haven't exhausted our remedies and this is our plan. But again, I think way back to the beginning of my presentation is the importance of communication and relationships, is that transparency and working with a parent and explaining these differences and being able to articulate the why and to bring them along. Because, and I'm going to flip to my next slide, and then I'm going to transition kind of with that piece, is that in my role, I like to joke that I get to deal with a lot of the hardest cases that come through Naperville Central. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And one piece that has always sufficiently helped me to be successful in that are the relationships I build with the families, students, the staff here at Naperville Central and within our community, as well as the relationships I've established with professionals just like Donna. I truly, and that comes back to the me. I believe in people. I believe in understanding people. And when you have a clear understanding of what is driving somebody's thinking and what their goals are, we can then figure out the middle space. And so for any student who is gone from an extended time, for an extended time from Naperville Central, I'm definitely at the core of that process. And so I am able to, in my position, work with all the teams, consider our resources, and help to collaborate with professionals outside of school and in school to then identify what is the most appropriate plan to support that student. One of the biggest pieces that I can say that has helped our students when returning from hospital programs or extended absences is communication across stakeholders. I have consistently started email chains between therapists, program staff here, like our student services teams, and students. And we've had communication chains like, hey, we met all of our goals today. This was a good day. Or, oh, so and so didn't make it to their English class. They skipped it. They didn't come to student services. Like, what are we going to do? How are we going to address this? And really creating that collaborative approach has really supported these very intense cases, because now we're to that very few kids. Like, these are our tier 3 who need the most support. And so our process is communicating with stakeholders, knowing our student, identifying needs versus wants, and building consensus around that, which is so essential. And then ensuring there's a system to monitor short and long-term progress. And so we start that process for any extended absence with a reentry meeting to then just discuss, why were we gone? What do we need to consider since that being gone? And then how can we support you in coming back? And then who's going to support you? And so again, it's that transparency, that communication, being able to articulate all of those pieces so that we can address that individual student's needs. I could go into it more, but I know that we're running out of time and I want to create space for questions. And so lastly, just again, homeschool collaboration, trust and transparency. I cannot emphasize that more, is essential to this process, and leveraging our community resources. I had a really cool opportunity a couple of years ago to go to Georgia to learn a little bit more about what they're doing to support students and what's different from what we're doing here in our western suburb land of Illinois, is that there was a lot more community involvement in the schools and the students' learning process. A lot of the supports and resources that we deliver here at Naperville Central were actually outsourced. And so what that inspired me was in just continuing to build those community partnerships and bring in those partners to our building, because by leveraging those relationships, we can then connect families more appropriately. And one piece of success, at least within the past 2 years, is we've been piloting a relationship with another hospital program where we have on-site counseling available to students, as well as being able to refer them to off-site counselors. I also leverage my relationship. Donna, I don't know how many times you and I have texted where I'm like, hey, so-and-so needs a hospital assessment, but they only have this insurance. And I know Donna, is working with SunCloud, but she also has a network and resources that she'll leverage. And so sometimes it's just using your community and your people to help support kids. And so I can't emphasize that enough. And so I'm going to end with, if there are any questions, please feel free to ask and we can discuss things. Here is my contact info. Again, you will be getting the slide deck. And then these are some of the resources that contributed to what I discussed today. There are some articles and journals that are listed in here. And so great information for you. And so there for your consumption, but feel free to reach out if after this presentation you have more questions or want to kind of dive in, and then I will stop my share somehow. Stop sharing.
I know, thanks, Kressa. Like, yes, like definitely collaboration is key. And yes, I work for SunCloud Health, but I have been around. So some of you know me from different places. I'm always happy to collaborate and help assist. And that's why Kressa and I like talk about things. And listen, I want to help the whole person too. Like my goal is to help our students kind of get what they need. Okay. So one of the questions, I want to go back to it. SOS program change every year. Like, I know you can answer that. Obviously, the students are not hearing the same repeated thing each year. Do you want to address?
Yes. So freshmen receive the lengthiest portion of the program, very in depth. Our sophomores, it's much more abbreviated because it's delivered in health. And then junior year, it's meant to target a little bit more of that adolescent. You've developed further, you've made personal connections. How can we continue to help support you? And then lastly, our senior lesson, which we have evolved over time, we love as a building. And we've actually gotten a lot of good feedback from our students because it focuses on life after high school. what are you going to do now that you're a adult? How do you access services? How do you know who to ask for help? How do you know like where your insurance card is and where to take it to? And do you know about consent? Do you know that you have to sign a release of information to connect certain people? Do you know about how to access a higher level of care? Like this, it's all meant to be informative and prepare our students to become the young adults that they are soon to become.
And the middle school one is different. Like the middle school
Yes, middle
SOS
school is
program.
different as well,
Yeah.
and it's targeted to those age levels.
Yeah.
Some similar content throughout, but we did really try because in the past it was very similar, and so as a district we've tried to evolve it to be more appropriate to each student.
Yeah, and I know like I know Val's on here, but I don't know if she sees it from Alyssa's mission. They're, I think, doing a curriculum for fifth graders too, which they have not, maybe fourth and fifth, but fifth is for sure. Because again, like I help out with the SOS, meaning I come into the schools on the days that you guys are doing SOS, and I help the social workers just kind of navigate and work with some of those students. Okay. And that's a free thing that I just do. And that's like Cressa said, it's just something that I feel like I'm trying to help people. That's it. And I've been doing it since I was back at Linden Oaks. Okay. What hospital system comes in to provide counseling services? It's Linden Oaks, right?
Endeavor, Endeavor, yeah.
Yeah, Endeavor. They call it Endeavor now, right? Um, Yep, Valerie said elementary SOS piloting it soon. Um, what else? There's another question here. The MTSS resources that you put into place for students returning from hospitalization, and how long do you plan for those interventions for a typical student returning from hospitalizations? I feel like I can help answer some of these questions, Caressa.
Yes, we've sat in those meetings together. It's really specific to the student. And so our typical practice is, let's say hypothetically, you are a student coming out of intensive outpatient. And so maybe you're attending school for part of your day and then in program for part of your day. We will set up a plan with teachers and communicate that this is when the student will be absent, this is when they'll be present. And we expect that students are here and using the supports and services, but really the core support is still in program. Once a student fully discharges, we then set up a system of regular check-ins or potentially suicide or safety monitoring. We make sure to clearly delineate that at the reentry meeting. I will often ask program, are there safety or self like concerns about the student's safety or ability to manage that? And so then I will discuss with the family what our suicide risk monitoring process looks like. If there is not risk of safety, we still do regular check-ins, and that could be 1 time a week to 2 times a week. To make it manageable, we rotate across the student service team members. So I'm at the core of the reentry process, but I am not the support team. I am definitely able to jump in and be supportive, but I really want the stakeholders who work with the kid regularly or the student regularly to be the ones providing that service. So rotating check-ins in our building are with the psychologist, social worker, counselor, dean, if appropriate. A lot of our deans in our building are lovely. We call them our social worker 0.5, as well as nurse. And so we leverage our student service team to one, build a relationship with the student. Now they know all of their people and who to go to, and then start that regular process of checking in. For students who are resistant, my at minimum ask is 2 to 3 weeks. For students who are receptive, I like to start with at least 4 weeks because then you've made it through some team members. And then we give them the option. Is this good? Do you want to reduce or do you want to continue or discontinue? For when they want to discontinue, we try to step down from a weekly to a bi-weekly and so on, just to make sure that we're setting them up for success and monitoring their progress. We can also monitor their progress through our regular student service team meetings, but we'd like to hear from the student. In some cases, we've also set up almost regular check-ins with families. Sometimes it's a once a month phone call, like, hey, we're going to call on Monday the 1st or however that falls, just to hear from your perspective how things are going. It's really dependent upon the student. And then also another piece that's huge that has really led to my success in academically helping to support our students is I have fervently and intensively pushed our department chairs to be part of our process. And so for any time I have communication regarding student absences, department chairs are aware, and now I can rely on them to help support classroom teachers in making educational decisions around what can be reduced and minimized. So that's a big one.
I know we're at time, but I know we started late, and so Caressa, is it okay if we take a couple more questions?
Yeah, I'm happy to take a couple more questions for those who can stay.
And then those that can't, yes, you will get your CEUs. You'll get the survey and stuff in the email, and so then you get the CEs usually like a week, like I said, I think early in the presentation, a week or so after. If you have any issues, obviously feel free to give me a shout, and I will ensure that we get those out to you. Okay. I know. Do you want to do? I'd love to hear more about. You did that one. Oh, use a screener for SOS, obviously.
Yeah, for SOS, it is called the Brief Screener of Adolescent Depression. The acronym is BSAD. And so we have every student complete that, and then there's a system in which you then respond according to students' responses. And so there are two questions that contain risk to self, either like are we concerned that they are thinking about suicide at this time, or long term, has they ever in their whole life tried or have thought about it? And so we would then respond to those students immediately. Then there's additional questions that help to assess, like, are there more factors contributing to these student struggles? And then we determine follow up based on their responses.
Yeah, they like layer at priority one, priority two, priority three, and that's why I go into the building sometimes, obviously, because the priority ones you have to see within that day, and so that's the highest level of care needed. Um, okay, about MTSS academic support for students returning for hospitalization. Did you answer that?
I think so.
I thought you did, right? That was kind of part of the earlier question, right?
Mhm.
The academic support, I mean, it's part of that whole meeting when they return from any kind of absence. You go over obviously the social emotional needs, but also the academics and kind of putting a plan in place, right?
We do, and we specifically talk through every class. And oftentimes that's where we will then decide, are there courses that need to be dropped? Are there times or situations during the school day where we can get that student support to help get them back on track? Now that we're getting towards the end of the semester, something we often use and leverage are the possibility of an incomplete, because that then gives us more time to help address the students' needs. And this is where then I'm pulling in the department chairs again, because oftentimes our teachers don't always know or are not comfortable with saying, like, oh, I can take all this away, or I can or I can't. And so the department chair can then help them make those decisions. And so we're all on the same page. And then my job is then to communicate all that information to the student and family to make sure we have a clear plan. And that's kind of where I keep coming back to that communication piece and clarity and knowing your resources and leveraging those. Because without all of this knowledge, I wouldn't be able to help support students in the way that I am now. It would be much more difficult. And so, from an academic standpoint, it's really about, as we all know, how on track are they to graduation? What resources do we need to consider to keep them on track while also just getting them back into school and using the skills that they just learned in program so that they can continue to find that success?
One of the questions I don't think we got to is how can MTSS best support in districts that may have less resources and then still be successful to support the students in the best ways they can? What do you think?
It's a great question. And I'm just going to go back to knowing who are your key stakeholders and starting that conversation. Um, we are resource rich. I'm so lucky to be as resource rich as we are, but that doesn't mean that we couldn't be doing many of the amazing things that we're doing if we had less. At the core of what our practice is just that transparency and that knowledge of what do we have and how can we leverage it. And so once that is clear, you can have a team come together and really articulate process within your building according to what's available to you. And now there's going to be times where maybe you don't have the resource to be able to address that. That's when having that administration involvement can then help to maybe consider long term, where do we need to reallocate some resources or funding to then be able to consider additional supports and services? Because we all know that there in education in general, there's always a barrier. There's always a stop point. And what has helped me in my practice throughout the years is using data to leverage the need. even from our building standpoint, we've been able to sustain and keep the people resources that we have because we collect so much information through our suicide risk monitoring, through our suicide assessments, through the reasons that students are coming to student services, how long staff are working with them. I ask that staff give me all this information so then I can leverage that to be like, hey, look, there's a need. District, please help to continue to make sure that we have these resources. And that being said, we know that that can't always be the case, but having that hard data really does help to make a strong argument for what you are advocating for.
Well, I guess too, like you said earlier, collaborating with whoever you can as outside partners, right? I mean, sometimes your district or your school doesn't have the resources, but maybe like checking who is around you that could maybe help support you in any way they can, right?
Absolutely.
Sarah, I know you have your hand raised. I don't think I can.
Yeah, can you hear me now though?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah,
Okay,
okay. So
perfect.
I
Thanks.
unplugged my desktop and got back on the laptop where I actually have a microphone. So you talk, I see these tiers and they're awesome. And obviously collaboration is such a huge focus. And so my question is, um, what is the buy-in and or response from classroom teachers for their role in supporting students and implementing these interventions? Because often I work at a school in District 214, things get and I don't mean this in a negative way, but pushback on student services because I think the view is like this is your department's issue or problem versus we have roles as classroom teachers and being collaborative and supporting the student every day. So how like I get buy-in from student services and from deans and admin, et cetera, but what about from classroom teachers?
Absolutely. And that's a great question, Sarah. One of the things that really was a super successful strategy in our building was helping to build buy-in from the staff themselves. And so we sought feedback from teachers around what are the behaviors or what are the things that interfere with your instruction and in your learning environment the most. And from that survey, we then established summer learning teams that included teachers, so those people who contributed to that survey and were willing to work over the summer. And obviously, there's extra pay, so there's incentive there, but come together to then help to identify a plan of how we are going to address it. And so we called those department learning leaders. And that department learning leader work was led by and driven by building leadership, but created a space for not only student services staff, but teachers to come together to collaboratively discuss a problem as well as how we were going to address that problem. And I will tell you, the buy-in was amazing. And so since then, we have kind of our all-in plans and support around specific school behaviors that have been interfering the most. And so our building targeted attendance, cell phone use, and now we've added school appropriate language because those were the big three that were getting in the way. And so from an attendance standpoint, what are teachers' roles and responsibilities from a classroom perspective? When do they know that they've done enough where they can kick it up to the next level? And then let's create clarity and transparency around those next steps. And so then from there, we also incorporated all of that department learning leader work into our professional development on institute days. And we revisit that throughout the school year. And so we always revisiting our all-in approach. How are we doing that? What's working? What's not working? And then we'll make those shifts. But having the teachers be part of that was huge because we had some naysayers. We had those teachers who all of us know who can be maybe a bit frustrated with how our system has worked and how it has supported our students. And I loved having them part of that conversation because then they were able then to give us that direct feedback in which we could say, well, this is what you would do and this is how you would support it. And so then additional people who may have that same perspective then had that insight and feedback. And then this also trickled in nicely because when we delivered these expectations, admin didn't deliver it, student services didn't deliver it, teachers did. And so then teachers were like, this is what we're doing. I believe in this. This is how it'll work in my classroom. You can do it too. And so I loved that because then I was there. I sat in those presentations as a support to have the back of the teachers who are, putting themselves out there. But then we're also able to make, new leadership opportunities for teachers and to take on that role of being, a learning partner with their colleagues. But then they're also delivering it from their perspective, which the buy-in was a little bit quicker there. I hope that helps.
I think that's great.
It does.
I know.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sarah. I know we're over, and I know we started late. Everyone, again, with the CEs, if you have any issues, questions, I put my email again in the chat, even though I know I had it on the screen. If you have questions for Caressa, I know she put her email. You'll get the slides, but I can help connect as well. So thank you so much, Caressa, again, for sharing your wisdom and just kind of being a part of the community and all that you do for obviously your students and staff. We appreciate you.
I'll be presenting at NASP, by the way, for those of you who are school psych. So maybe I'll see you at NASP.
Yeah. Okay, everyone. Thanks so much for showing up.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Caressa.